Hi, it's 1st of March 2024, which down here in New Zealand is officially the first day of autumn. Although it doesn't feel very autumnal, still quite warm in the days, getting a little bit cooler in the mornings and the evenings, but yeah, the year is progressing as as it always does. As you see here, we're looking at this band today. That one's not in great condition, is it? A band called Guns N' Roses. You see, I don't have Appetite for Destruction, which I've actually talked about in a video before, that it's one of the ones on my list to get. And that I actually saw it in a store one day for $1. And for whatever reason, I didn't buy it. And I've talked about that phenomenon before, where some days I will just absolutely not be in the mood to buy anything. And even if I see a CD that I would like, that I've been looking for, actually I would say, yeah, it would have to be in a certain category. And this is what I'm going to talk about with Guns N' Roses soon. I'm actually not really a Guns N' Roses fan. Beyond a handful of songs, I've always thought they're just not my kind of band. Their music, I mean, there's something about it. But so they're in the category where I know it kind of sounds stupid to be buying CDs of a band I don't like. Well, I can listen to them, and there are a few songs that I do kind of like, and they're kind of part of the history of rock and roll, you know. And so in that kind of respect, would want to buy their CDs. But again, not paying more than $1 or $2 for them. But they're not a band I get excited about. So therefore, when I see their CD and I'm in a mood where I don't want to buy them, it's like, I'll get it another time. I'm sure I'll see it another time. Whereas if it was a band that I'm excited about, like, I don't know, what's a band I'm excited about? Boards of Canada. What? Talk about a lot, or I don't know, whatever, I don't know. A band from the 90s that I was a big fan, like Alice in Chains or something. If I saw that, would get me excited, and if I didn't have, I would absolutely buy it, even if I wasn't in the mood. But that wasn't the case with these guys. Anyway, so Guns N' Roses. I remember when I was a kid in the late 80s, like a kid, they were popular, and the first song I ever heard of theirs was Paradise City. And this is the thing with Guns N' Roses, is that there's parts of their songs that I like. Sometimes it's a riff here or there, or like a chord progression or a movement in the song that I think, oh, that's cool. But the songs as a whole, I kind of don't like. So if you think about the bigger songs, like Welcome to the Jungle, I think that's got a cool intro. It does, with the delay. But then once it gets to the verse, I've always felt that song kind of falls flat. And obviously this is just me, because they're one of the biggest bands ever, and that's one of their most popular songs. So I'm not saying my opinion is right. I'm just saying how I feel about it is that that song starts off with a lot of energy. It kind of builds up with that kind of guitar delay, and then the bass and the drums come in, and it kind of, really builds to crescendo. Din, 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 din. And then it kind of gets to the din, 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 and I kind of feel like it falls flat. It kind of loses, it's like all the air comes out of the balloon. Don't like the chorus or the verses. And then the next part of that song I do like is the bridge. The part where it goes din, 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 din. Or the part where kind of the breakdown. I especially like that on the live version. There's the live era CD they released in the late 90s, and there's a live version, I think early 2000s, of Welcome to the Jungle that part of the song I really like. And I could say the same thing for a lot of the other songs. There's like bits and pieces of the songs that I like, but then overall I don't like them. So don't have Appetite for Destruction, don't have GNR Lies, or whatever it's called. I think it was an EP. I do have the Used Your Illusions 1 and 2. See, this copy here, the case is very beat up. I haven't got around to replacing the cover. These were both $1. You can see I bought this one about 2 years ago. This one I can't remember exactly when. These are the original 1991 pressings. So as for these albums, the thing about the why I don't like Guns N' Roses is that they're too, and this might sound stupid, but they're too bluesy. There's too much of a blues element. And when you think about kind of classic rock bands, you know, you'd put Guns N' Roses into the classic rock category now, wouldn't you? They've, enough time has elapsed since their heyday, and those classic rock bands is bands that come from a blues background, and then there's other who come from a more, I don't know what you call it, varied background. We kind of make some jazz elements or some classical elements. Maybe that's kind of more the prog side of classic rock. If a band is too heavily rooted in the blues, I tend to not like them. And there are many exceptions to that, so it's not like a rule. Like, for example, Led Zeppelin are one of my favorite bands of all time, and they're heavily rooted in the blues, to the extent that Jimmy Page was wholesale ripping off old blues artists. But there's just something, very bluesy about Guns N' Roses that I don't like. The songs that I do like of theirs that are much more the kind of metal sounding ones, like, for example, on Use Your Illusion 1, I like Right Next Door to Hell, that opener. I really like the bass opening, and that's something that I do like about them, is I like Duff McKagan's bass tone. Obviously, the other song that's got a great bass intro and bass tone is You Could Be Mine, which I think is on number 2. Oh, yes, track 12, yeah, number 2. But then there's things like, you go through most of those other ones, like Dust and Bones, You Ain't the First, Double Talking Jive, Bad Apples. It's just not for me. Axl's voice, also so unique, and just so, you hear it and immediately you know it's him. It's so recognizable, but I can only take it in very small doses. And I listen to an album's or a concert's worth full of it would grate on me or something. Like, it's not as unique and iconic as it is, his voice. It doesn't have a lot of dynamic range. Although I read something that he's actually got quite a big octave range. Obviously, he can go high. We could go high. And then if you think about like songs like Don't Cry, does it kind of like quite low. But I guess dynamic range in a different way, maybe, which I can't really explain. So see the other songs that I like on it. I like Civil War. But there's parts of that song are a bit boring, but I like the parts where it kind of kicks in and it's got some kind of, oomph to it. And I like the lyrics to that song as well. As much as, sometimes people shit on bands for trying to write socially conscious lyrics. I quite like the overall theme behind that he sings in the chorus. No, I think it was the verses. Kind of the idea that the one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. It's kind of what he's alluding to in parts of that. What else? Oh, Knocking on Heaven's Door. I loathe that song. I fucking loathe that song. They used to play a live version of that on the radio here quite regularly in the 90s, I remember, and it went on for like 8 minutes. I don't like that song. I don't really like Bob Dylan's version of it, but I can't stand the Guns N' Roses version of it. Can't fucking stand it. And that's just, yeah, that's kind of indicative of my overall feeling. Some of these songs, they're too long. They are boring, and Axl's voice gets on my nerves. November Rain, you know, like talking about long songs, and it's not as I'm against long songs. I like fucking some songs by bands that are 20 minutes long. I like Black Rose Immortal by Opeth is 21 minutes long. Or The Change of Seasons by Dream Theater is like half an hour long or something, I think. But there's a lot's happening. Those songs are like change. It sounds like you got multiple songs over those things, whereas it's not just dragging the same thing out over. But in saying that, November Rain, I know some people want to shit on that song and think it's just cheesy and ridiculous. That song's okay. Okay. I can hear, listen to that like once a year and appreciate it. But a lot of people, it's kind of always baffled me with Guns N' Roses that a lot of people just consider them to be the greatest thing ever. And I've never got it. It's like, it seems they're quite derivative of a lot of 60s, 70s rock bands. And they didn't really do anything particularly different or new. A lot of people talk about their energy and their aura and their kind of their live performance, especially in their kind of early days. I've read, accounts of before they were signed, who they signed to Geffen, and they would do these live shows in LA, like at Whiskey and places like that, and they were like it was just like mind blowing how great they were live. So maybe that's part of it. But obviously they sold tens and tens of millions of albums, so it can't just be the live thing, because not everyone who's buying an album of theirs is seeing them live. The greatest hits, I got this also secondhand. You can see the condition of this is okay. I can feel the CDs kind of moving around a little bit because some of these things are broken. There's a kind of classic era photograph of the band before Steven Adler was kicked out, the drummer, and before Izzy Stradlin left, I think in the early 90s. I think he left in the first touring cycle of Use Your Illusion. And he's an interesting guy, actually, because he never went back. Like, I know he's played the odd show with them here and there, and maybe even part of a tour with them here and there. But I think he got sober in the, like I said, the early 90s, kind of around the Use Your Illusion, maybe after the first tour or something, or during the first. And then he kind of refused to put up with Axl's shit after that. So I read, as much as I say I don't like Guns N' Roses, I actually read a lot of stuff about them. I've read the Mick Wall biography of Axl, Slash's autobiography, and I just late last year read Duff McKagan's autobiography. And I've read other bits and pieces as well, maybe another book, maybe like there was another book, I think, just of the overall band. And if you read about that time where they kind of blew up and around the Use Your Illusion tour, or the album's release, and Axl was just out of control, like every night being hours and hours late to taking the stage. And the rest of the band, you kind of like, I guess if you didn't read them, you wouldn't really have, I always kind of assumed that it was the whole band just being dicks, being kind of arrogant and like, oh, fuck it, they'll wait for us for 3 hours, or they don't care. Well, not that they don't care, but we're good enough. But actually, from that sound, especially from Duff's book, that whole thing is kind of like what led to his drug and alcohol problems more than anything else. He was so embarrassed and kind of like mortified by them doing that to the crowd every night, and him not being able to confront Axl about it, that he just kind of drunk himself into oblivion to kind of deal with it. That's what he says in the book, at least. I don't know, maybe he's saying that in hindsight or retrospect to kind of cover. But I imagine it was because they were pretty detached. The band were pretty detached at that time. They weren't like all, it wasn't like the early days where we were all hanging out together. Axl was very kind of secluded from the rest of the band. So it was not as though they were all happy about that. And I can imagine as a band, that would be pretty shit. You know, you kind of arrive at the venue ready to play and you look at bands' preparation to go on stage, and not as though they just walk cold from the limo to the stage. They've got to warm up. You got to warm up your hands if you're playing guitar. Some guys I remember seeing a concert footage of Green Day, and the bass player was running on a treadmill for half an hour before hitting the stage, just to kind of get his body warmed up and, you know, kind of get pumped, I guess, or kind of release some of that nervous energy. So when you get to a kind of that level, you can't, I'm sure some bands do, but you shouldn't just go directly from the hotel room to the limo straight on stage. Or the other thing, the other one is the first time I saw Some Kind of Monster, you know, the end of that, there's the thing where they show the band getting in the van from, I guess, one part of the backstage area going to the stage, and James kind of warming up his voice, and just how nervous he seemed. Nowadays, I think after that, you've seen, maybe with YouTube and stuff, you see a lot more of that kind of backstage stuff. But that was kind of my first time really seeing that process, and especially with a band as big as Metallica, seeing how, like I said, how nervous James Hetfield seemed, like in the van, and then behind backstage, kind of like he was like, you know, strumming his guitar. Obviously the guitar's not plugged in, kind of warming up and doing his vocal exercises, and he's kind of like moving around and doing pull-ups on the metal bar of the stage behind it. And man, it just seemed like he was so kind of pent up and ready to go. And obviously you would be, but I kind of thought when you get to a band like Metallica, that level, we've been playing, you know, at that stage close to, you know, 25, 30 years, and you know, one of the biggest bands in the world, and he was just, they've done that a million times, but he's still every single time still so nervous. It was kind of eye-opening. And so, yeah, I'm kind of going off topic here, aren't I? I'm not even talking about the CDs. Anyway, the greatest hits has got everything you would assume it would have. Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child of Mine. Patience. Don't like that song, Patience. Don't like it. Paradise City, like I said. Knocking on Heaven's Door, fucking awful. Civil War, I said I like. You Could Be Mine, that's a good song. I like that. Don't Cry. Don't really like that song. That's kind of up there. I put kind of Don't Cry and November Rain together. They're kind of songs that I can kind of appreciate for their, especially the something that kind of big and kind of grand. You can admire the songwriting, but at the same time, I can only really listen to them very sparingly without getting sick of them. Live and Let Die, actually, now so I did like the Guns N' Roses cover of Live and Let Die. It kind of feels really, if you listen to the Wings version, and I like the Wings version as well, I've always, if you listen to the two versions back to back, you can just kind of feel the Guns N' Roses version has a lot more power, a lot more kind of bang. You know, the Live and Let Die, bang, bang, there's a lot more kind of infant to it. And then again in the chorus, or that kind of the da-da-din, da-da-din, da-da, there's a lot more kind of, it's bigger, sounds better. And then those last 1, 2, 3, 4 songs, I don't like any of them. I don't like their cover of Sympathy for the Devil. So yeah, I'm not a big fan. Then, obviously, after them, they released Spaghetti Incident, which I think is all covers, or majority covers. And then they had obviously a long break. They released that Live Eras album. Like I said, it was either late 90s, early... Actually, I think it was the late 90s. Late 90s, early 2000s. They also released that, I think it was Oh My God, which was, excuse me, which was on the End of Days soundtrack, that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from 1999, which I actually own. And then there was a longer, and then 2008, I believe, or was it 2007? Is the date on here? 2008. We get to this oft-talked about album, Chinese Democracy, which I picked up 4 years ago for $2, $11.11. On Armistice Day, it was priced. So, what can be said about this album? So much has been said, hasn't it? But I'm sure a lot of it, this is, why is it not opening? Here we go. This is in one of those, I've talked about these before. They're kind of like, there's more updated jewel cases with the rounded edges and the press tab to open it, and a much more robust jewel case central hub that doesn't break as easily, and the book is kind of tucked in here on these things. So I am going to admit, I've only listened through to this album end to end probably twice, and that was probably when I first bought it back in 2020. I listened through to it, and I remember my first listening, I thought it's not bad. It's not a bad album, but it's not memorable either. But there were a few parts of songs, because I was kind of listening to it while I was doing something else. There were parts of songs that I thought, oh, that's okay, or that's interesting. I like that riff part or something. And then I kind of thought to myself, well, I'm going to go back and listen to this again when I get a chance. And so probably like a year later, I listened to it again and had the same kind of feeling. That isn't bad, but if it wasn't Guns N' Roses, I don't think anyone would even look at this, give it a second look, you know? I haven't listened to it again. And part of that is because I have so many other CDs to listen to. And it's just finding the time to listen to a whole album that you don't particularly want to listen to, but you do kind of want to listen to kind of get a better feel for it. It's just hard to find the time to do so. So obviously this album was like, what, 10 years in the making? At least, like, you know, I know obviously Spaghetti Incident was their last proper release, and that was 93, I think. And so people say, well, 93 to 2008, but he wasn't working on it continuously. I think he was working concertedly on it from about 98 through to 2008. So it's probably like 10 years proper of album writing, production, all the rest of it. Braids era. So we got Axel Buckethead. Who is that? Who's the is that the bassist? Or I can't actually see. Is that a bass? 1, 2. Yes, it is a bass. I think Tommy Stimson was the bassist, wasn't it? Well, at least one. There was multiple artists in the studio. I know at one stage, maybe that's Chris Pittman. At one stage, Robin Fink from 9 Inch Nails was playing guitar with them, and he recorded some of the guitar on this album. Maybe that's him there, actually. No. Have they got pictures of every person who played on the album? Chinese Democracy. So I don't really understand what he's trying to get at with the whole joke. Like, obviously, China is not a democracy, and is it like meant to be what's this thing? Kind of like, there's another keyboard. It's a double positive, negative. Anyway, I can't name all these guys. There's so many bloody good musicians on this thing. I know that for Josh Freese was drumming with them for a while as well. So you see guitars, Paul Tobias, Robin Fink, Buckethead, Bumblefoot, that's Ron Thal, and Richard Fortis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guitarists. Bass, Tommy Stimson. Okay, I had that one right, Stimson. Drums, Frank Ferreira. He did all the drums on this album. No, he didn't. That's just on that. Oh, sorry, I thought that was a whole album. This is just that one song. How the fuck are there 1, 2, 3, 4 guitarists on one song? You got Dizzy Reed, Chris Pittman, and Axl Rose keyboard. So Dizzy Reed is still with them. That's right. So Shackler's Revenge. I think that might have been one of the singles, wasn't it? Guitarist, Buckethead. Guitars, Robin Fink, Paul Tobias. I think Buckethead's almost on every song. No, he's not on that one. He's not on Catcher in the Rye. That's only Bumblefoot and Robin Fink and Paul Tobias. Just 3 guitarists on that one. Every song's got at least 3 guitarists. So it looks like Tommy Stinson was the only bassist. Oh no, sorry. On There Was a Time, Chris Pittman did additional bass. Chris Pittman sounds like he's quite an all-star player. He's playing the 12-string guitar here. He's playing keyboards throughout. He's playing bass on that song. He's a real utility player. Let's see if there's any other kind of... But the drums, Brain was the guy from Primus. He played in Primus through kind of their peak period in the 90s, I'm pretty sure. And I see his name's popping up here a lot on the drums, Brain, but also seeing Frank Ferrer. So 2 drummers. And on There Was a Time, they're using 2 drummers on the same song. Mellotron, Chris Pittman. Anyway, my point is, and a point that has been driven home by multiple music critics and writers and journalists, is that it was overwritten, overproduced in the extreme. And the end result was certainly not as great as all that would suggest. You know, a 10-year production phase for an album, you'd think when it comes out it's going to be mind-blowing, but it was kind of just like I don't know, a typical rock record with bits and pieces here and there, a little bit overblown in places, but nothing really to suggest that it would warrant 10 years to write. So yeah, I've really blabbed there a lot about Guns N' Roses and talked about, considering it's a band I don't really like, I've talked a lot about them, but that's kind of like a what do you call that? Like a flyer thing that they've added, and I can't get it out. There we go. This is from, I guess, what, the online store this person bought it from originally. You can buy Guns N' Roses t-shirts. Now, I guess the last thing I'd say is that one of my brothers, my younger brother, I don't know if he still is, I guess he still is, a huge Guns N' Roses fan. A huge Guns N' Roses. I think he's seen them in concert 3 or 4 times. At least 3 times. I know he traveled to Japan to see them live there. He also saw them in Australia. I used to live in Australia. And then he saw them, he lives back in New Zealand now. He saw them in Auckland when they played here most recently at the Eden Park Stadium show. Might have actually seen them another time. Then I actually, yeah. And he's got a tattoo on his arm of something, maybe a couple. Actually, he's got a slash tattoo on his hand. I don't want to give away too much information about my brother. He's got multiple Guns N' Roses tattoos on him somewhere. Like I said, I'm not sure if he's still the biggest fan of them, like he was. But I remember at one stage he was fucking nuts about Guns N' Roses, which again, it kind of baffles me a little bit. It's just I can't see them being the kind of band that you'd get super excited about. Like a lot of those bands of that era, that kind of late 80s. I know Guns N' Roses are kind of apart from this, but I was to say that the hair metal era of rock. So many of those bands, to me, it seemed it was more like it was about the image and the story than it was the music. Like Motley Crue, and maybe this is heresy, and there are people out there who are absolutely huge Motley Crue fans. Motley Crue's music does not in any way come close to matching the story behind the band. I would say I don't like Motley Crue's music. It's just, there's nothing special about it at all. But the way that people talk about them and the way they mythologize, you think, well, they're the greatest rock and roll band of all time. And you listen to this is just boring shit. I'd rather listen to fucking, I don't know, anything else than this. And it's kind of, Guns N' Roses, their music, they certainly had their music. And yeah, I can more understand why people are fans of Guns N' Roses than I can of Motley Crue. The other thing is that Slash, the way people talk about Slash, it just, I don't know, run-of-the-mill guitarist to me. Never did anything particularly special. I know some of it, yeah, anyway. I'm sure some people are listening to this and just thinking, what the fuck are you talking about? It's just my opinion. And it may be, it may be wrong. Anyway, we'll leave it there. 4 Guns N' Roses albums. Thanks for watching.